This is a video on working a Kitchener graft in garter stitch. We're going to graft these two small swatches together, and we want to maintain the garter stitch pattern across the swatch when it's finished, so that as we go from one side to the other, it's garter stitch all the way and the seam will be invisible. It's a pretty simple technique, and it takes a little bit of practice when you start, but you'll get it real quick. I hold both the pieces together so that directly under the needle are the purl bumps. The working yarn is coming here, and that's what you would use to graft with, but in this case I cut it off and we're going to use some contrasting colored yarn to graft with so you can see how the grafting goes. The back needle's the same. The purl bumps are directly under the needle, so you want to be ready. You would be ready to knit a row on each of these two pieces. They're exactly the same. I've got my grafting yarn here. It's a different color so you can see how it goes. And we're going to do a setup first. The setup is you go through the first stitch as if to purl, leaving it on the needle. Go through the first stitch on the back needle as if to purl, leaving it on the needle. And notice that I'm taking the yarn underneath the needle tips. We'll always be working under the needle tips. If you work over them, you'll create yarn overs. We don't want those. Now we're ready to start. So we're going to take the first tapestry needle, go through the first stitch on the front needle as if to knit, and remove the stitch from the needle. Then you go through the second stitch as if to purl and pull the tapestry yarn through. Now in the beginning you'll have to experiment a little so that you can get your tension right. It's easier to leave the grafting yarn too loose and tighten it up later than it is to make it too tight and try to loosen it up. So in the beginning we'll leave it loose and then we'll adjust it, and I'll show you how to do that. Now we're going to go to the back needle. We're going to go through the first stitch as if to knit, the second stitch as if to purl. Notice it was the exact same maneuver that we did on the front needle, and the yarn is going underneath the needle tips. Now we're going to bring the yarn back under the front needle tip to the front, and we're going to go through the first stitch. This is the same maneuver. There's only one maneuver. You go through the first one as if to knit, removing it. Go through the second stitch as if to purl and pull the yarn all the way through. Don't pull it too tight. Then the same thing on the back needle. The first stitch as if to knit, the second stitch as if to purl. We'll do a couple more stitches, then take a look at our tension and see what it looks like. And as you go, you'll get a feel for how tight to pull it, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can pull it just the right amount so that your stitches are perfect, and you won't have to do much adjusting at all once the seam is done. Oops, we're catching everything here. Okay, there we go. Now let's take a look at these. These look pretty big. They're too big. You can see they are way too sloppy. So we're going to tighten them up a little bit. I'm just going to move some of this excess yarn over to the tail. So I know that I can work these a little bit tighter. Just a little bit of adjusting. There we go. Now we're ready to start again. We know we can pull it a little bit tighter. We're ready to work on the front stitch because we're coming off the back. So the next will be the front. Off as if to knit, on as if to purl, keeping the yarn under the needle tips and pulling it a little bit tighter. Off as if to knit, on as if to purl, and we'll continue on. Let's see what it's going to look like. This is a wonderful technique to learn how to use. There's lots of opportunities for grafting in garter stitch, and when you get it perfect, it is absolutely invisible. You can stop every once in a while and check your tension. And as I said, it's a lot easier to tighten up these stitches than it is to loosen them. We'll do a couple more and we'll check again. Okay. Oh, that's looking very nice. Very, very good. So we'll continue on to the end here. I'll go a little quicker. You get a little rhythm going, a little sing-songy thing, knit one off, purl one on. I do that little mantra to myself as I'm working this. I'm coming along. That went over the needle. Do you see that? That's over the needle top. We need to be careful to not do that because you'll end up with yarn overs. And in your real work, you would not be using a contrasting colored yarn. And that yarn going over the top of the needle would look just like a stitch, and you would probably work it and end up with the wrong number of stitches, and it wouldn't look good. Not only because it's the wrong number of stitches, but you would have a misshapen stitch right in the middle of your graft. We're coming up on the end here. There's a little extra step that you do right at the end, just like there is at the beginning. Now, if you have a different number of stitches, one more stitch on one needle than the other, just start the graft on the side that has the most stitches and finish the graft on the side that has the most stitches. So now we're going to end up with one stitch left on each needle. So we're going to go through the front one as if to knit and go through the back one as if to knit, and that finishes off our graft. Now you can see what it looks like. We have a little tightening to do here. You can see over here how nice it looks. Over here it's a little bit loose, so we're just going to move some of that yarn over to that edge. Being careful to not split your stitches and not to pull it too tight. I'm really getting this one out of whack, but you can get the idea. It is best to practice as I'm doing here, because when you're working with the same color of yarn, it is a little bit more difficult to see which stitches you should be pulling on to tighten up the graft. Here we go. Now you can see if this were blocked and stretched a little bit, it looks very good. Blends right in.